Hi, everyone. Kelly from the Hub here today with our friend Will, who is our development director. But today we are talking about all things bee. Hello there, Will. How are you?
Hey, part three
Yes,
coming
part
up.
three.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, development director and B development director.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coincidentally.
So we are bringing you this series because for the ultimate purpose, because we are bringing a beehive to the library, a live observational beehive, and we wanted to sort of whet your whistle with all things bee. And today's episode is all about things that have threatened bees. So in previous episodes, Will has taught us all about bees and showed us his hive, which I have to tell you, I've been so fascinated that you could put a hive in a tree stand. I have to tell you, I've talked to every single person in the whole universe about, did you know you could put a hive in a tree stand?
You can.
I've literally talked to people like everywhere about that.
I actually did a paid article. I wrote an article for a beekeeping magazine on that topic. Got paid for it because people had no idea that it was there isn't a lot of crossover between hunting and beekeeping, it seems like.
Yeah,
Then when people found out you can do that, it's a heck of a way to get something up in a tree. So
yeah.
yeah,
So
right.
so I wasn't the only person in the whole universe fascinated by that.
No,
Yeah.
definitely not. And yeah, I think you can buy tree stands right now for $50, something like that. So it's a
Wow.
great way to get started if you
Yeah,
want to
absolutely.
try to catch some bees.
Cool.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about threats to bees.
Mhm.
One of the things that has been on a lot of people's minds that is hit the news over the past several years, of course, has been colony collapse disorder. That was the thing that went unnamed for a while,
Yep.
that we were all sort of saying, what has happened to bees? Before there was a name for it, we were all like, hey man, where are the bees? Because we weren't, we we knew that we should be seeing bees, but we weren't seeing bees for a while. And then we were seeing hives of bees that were supposed to be there that were dead.
Mm.
And so we didn't know what was going on.
Yep.
And so I will let you take it away because you know all the things about that. So you chat about it and I will ask questions as we go.
Well, it's one of those topics, Kelly, where you don't end up with any clean solutions or any clean explanations to the problem, and it's an evolving problem that's not fully understood.
Hmm.
You mentioned CCD, colony collapse disorder. That is a misunderstood, not quite understood problem. It is a problem that peaked in about 2008. And I don't know when you heard about it, but I sort of remember hearing about it about 2008, 2010,
Yeah.
that bees were dying at an alarming rate. That was sort of the thing being sprayed into the headlines and
Yeah.
everything. Um, it was true. There were lots of beekeepers that were reporting that colonies were vacating. So rather than having a bunch of dead bees in a hive, right, where the
Hmm.
beehive has just died, the bees were vacating. So they would just leave and then go off to yonder to die. And nobody really understood what was going on. And the fact of the matter is that that's still not really understood what was happening.
Hmm.
Uh, we have seen less of it to the point where it's no longer being tracked very much. During about the 2008 to 2015 period, so about 7 years, uh, the USDA and other beekeeping sort of science authorities were tracking colony collapse disorder very closely, making sure that it wasn't going to be a huge problem, making sure that they're trying to take mitigation measures. That worked somehow, but nobody's really sure what happened. So there could have been a couple of explanations. One of them could have been pesticide use. Pesticides, like a very common pesticide called neonicotinoids, which are actually a nicotine type chemical put onto seeds in order to protect the plant against pests. That may have had something to do with it, in application of those pesticides, but that has not been conclusive. It could have been a matter of beekeepers who are migrant doing kind of not taking best practices with their bees. And when I say migrant, I mean there is a whole industry of beekeepers who move bees from one place to another in order to pollinate like almond fields in and almond orchards in California. But
Yeah.
then they'll move from California and then they will move to maybe the southeast to do, citrus groves or something like that.
Oh, and they move their bees with them.
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And
neat.
that can be a major disease vector, just like we've learned with COVID, where people moving around and moving from one place to another can be a disease vector. They were thinking maybe these migrant beekeepers who were the most affected by this colony collapse disorder, maybe they were moving something around. So I am not a scientist. Before I start talking about what my theory on this is, I am not a scientist. I am an amateur beekeeper.
Or do you play one on TV?
They wouldn't let me on TV even if I tried. So with this face and giant head, they would not let me on TV. So what I will do is put out my working theory on this. So Kelly, do you know what this is?
That looks like a tick to me.
That is. So I believe that's a deer tick. I have a hard time telling the different ticks apart.
Yeah, I just see tick.
Right, and they're all, pretty equally nasty.
Yeah.
There's a few things that kind of give me the willies, like spiders or whatever. I don't really get grossed out by a lot of bugs, but ticks are some next level, and that's
ticks creep me out.
Right, and that's partially because of the disease.
Yeah.
Ticks, because they're blood-eating parasites, carry a lot of diseases, and they can transfer diseases between humans and animals. One minute they're drinking blood off of a mouse, the next minute they're drinking blood off of a human. They're drinking blood between humans. I mean, it's in general kind of a gross way of transmitting disease, but a very effective one.
Yep.
Well, it turns out that honeybees also have ticks.
Their own kind of version.
They have their own version, which looks like, let me pull up this image. Looks like this.
There's bee ticks.
That is right.
Of course there are.
Like that.
Oh man.
So this is.
So that's like bee fur.
That's bee hair. So if you look really closely at a honeybee, you'll see that it's a fuzzy.
Yeah.
It's like a fuzzy animal. If it was as big,
cute.
It is. It's adorable. If it was as big as a dog, it would be fuzzy. It'd be like have hair like a dog.
Yeah. This is a creature that could live on a bee.
That not only could, it does, and it does quite well. And we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of it, but the main thing to take away from what I'm going to talk about, because we're not doing a quiz here, is that ticks on bees transmit disease just about as well as ticks on humans do.
All right.
And this is called the Varroa mite, MITE.
Yep.
And it's also called Varroa destructor, which because it's a very destructive little mite. Although one thing I should say is it's not little. Here we go. This is a honeybee with the mite on it. So if you're a honeybee and you get a Varroa mite on you, it would be like having a tick on a human the size of a pancake. So if you can imagine, you've got this giant parasite.
Gross.
In this case, honeybees do not have blood the way humans do. They have an analog called hemolymph, which is it's like a clear liquid. Bees don't have a circulatory system the way humans do. Their organs sit in like a pool, essentially like a big pool of blood. But it's doing the same function. It's carrying nutrients. It's providing oxygen, all of those things. Maybe it's not providing oxygen. I'm not too sure about that, but it has the same function basically.
Yeah.
The Varroa mite gets in between the armored plates on the bee, which is the cuticle, and it sucks blood. It has a straw for a mouth, and it gets right in there, and it
grows in size just like a tick would on a dog or on a ewe.
It engorges,
Yeah.
with blood and so on. Um, if you have a tick on you, how do you identify it, Kelly? Like how do you know you have a tick?
Ew, it grows and gets big and nasty. And full of grossness.
And do you
And,
do you
and it's squishy.
do you feel it or you see it? It sounds like you're talking about sight, right?
Yeah. So I've never had one on me, but I've had one. My dogs, two of my dogs have had it, and I felt it on my dog, and
Yeah.
you feel that like squishy spot, and then when you pull their fur away, you can. It's so gross. You can feel it, and then you try to get it off.
Right. Okay, perfect. So there's some sensory organs you use here to identify the this mite. So I'm going back to the beehive here. This is a
Yeah.
picture we showed last time. This is a picture of the outside of a beehive. If you go through that door where all the bees are going in,
Yeah.
you are in darkness, complete darkness,
Right.
or near complete darkness. Bees, when they're in the hive, are not relying on sight. And one of the ways that you find ticks on yourself or on your dog is through sight. Well, if it's dark inside the hive, then bees aren't able to see these parasites on them, even though they're as big as a pancake. One of the tricky things that a varroa mite does, here's another nasty picture. This is like an electron microscope picture, I believe. You can see the nasty legs. It has its own hairs on it. It is truly a gross looking animal. If you'll see, it's kind of shaped like a turtle. It's got a shell
Yeah.
on the back here. That is the cuticle of the mite. And from my understanding and doing some reading about these mites is they actually can change their smell to match that of the bees. And in that way, they become invisible. Because what is a bee relying on inside of the hive? They're relying on vibrations. And so they actually feel through their feet what's happening in there, as well as smell. They have very complex antenna, which are a smell organ. Well, how does this blend in? It blends in through smell,
Right.
which
So
is
like the bee would just see it as like a lump
yep,
of bee. It
yeah,
doesn't see it as anything else.
right.
Oh,
It's invisible. It's essentially the one way I've described Varroa is a lot like a vampire, right? If you read about
yeah.
vampires in fiction, a vampire looks like a human being, right? But has supernatural powers and drinks blood. I mean, that's basically what a Varroa is.
Right.
It looks exactly like a bee. They have no idea that it's there, and it wreaks havoc. So as a mite gets into a bee, it transmits all kinds of nasty diseases to bees. And let me see here. This is the saddest picture. This is a honeybee with what's called deformed wing virus, which comes from the mites and is transmitted to the mites. It actually shrivels up the wings of the bee to the point where it can't fly anymore, and therefore it's pretty much useless in the hive. Usually dies pretty quickly. Um, there's an Israeli virus that is spread via varroa mites. I mean, there's just it's like you can list five, or the Lake Sinai virus, I think is which one that's what that's called. So there's just a number of viruses that are transmitted through varroa mites.
Huh.
My theory on colony collapse disorder is that it was in part due to the explosion of varroa mites in North America, but and probably also pesticide pressure, habitat loss, any number of other pressures with varroa mites combined ended up killing a lot of bees.
Huh.
So the question is, well, let me tell you a little story here. So I'm leaning away from my computer here. So back in the 1800s, I believe it was around 1830. So around the time, I'm sorry, 1853. So just prior to the Civil War, Lorenzo Langstroth out of Philadelphia published a book called The Hive and the Honeybee, where he talked about how the best way to construct a hive, and he had some theories on swarming, and it's a great little book about beekeeping. What he did not mention in this book anywhere is varroa mites.
Hmm.
Why do you think that was?
I would probably say that he hadn't, or he or other people didn't know about those mites at that time.
And they definitely didn't. And the reason they didn't is, I'm going to show you a picture of a bee here. Yeah. So believe it or not, this is not a European honeybee. This is Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee. The Asian honeybee is a different species of bee. It acts slightly different from our European honeybees, which have come from Europe, but it is technically a different species. It evolved in Asia, so you'll find these in Korea, China, Vietnam, that area of East Asia. What it turned out was, in the 20th century, beekeepers keeping Asian honeybees also kept European honeybees next to it. Varroa mites are an invasive species from Asia. And essentially what happened was, people keeping European honeybees and Asian honeybees in hives next to each other had the mite jump from the Asian honeybees
Huh.
to the European honeybees, and then it spread basically worldwide. There are a couple countries that have had like embargoes on bee transfer. So like Australia doesn't have it, but it has basically spread across all of Europe, all of North America, and much of the world at this point. So it's actually it's a case with the mites of a invasive species.
Huh.
They did not have them back at Lorenzo Langstroth's time in the 1800s, and now we do. And they have really peaked and become a serious problem in the beekeeping community. I would say there's no greater threat to beekeepers and beehives in America than this nasty mite. It is devastating. So just to tell you a little bit about the mite, this stage of the mite climbing around on the bee is sort of the final stage. And you see this bee is standing on the cells,
Right.
which we know as the honeycomb, right? When a baby bee is inside of the honeycomb being fed and nursed, everything like that, the mite climbs in with that baby bee and begins to feed on the baby bee basically in its cradle. It's almost like a vampire, or it's almost like a baby in a human cradle having ticks all over it from birth. And what's that going to do to the baby? It's going to, really mess with its growth and everything like that. Essentially, bees are raising the mites alongside them. It becomes such a problem, they become so diseased that the colony collapses. Sometimes the colony will actually fly away in an attempt to escape the mites.
Wow.
And it's just devastating. And this is a major problem for honeybees. One that I struggle with every single year. There is no year where I do not have mites in my hives. There are people who don't treat their bees, and they try to go without treatment and try to breed a bee that can withstand these mites. I think it's University of Iowa has they call them ankle biters. I don't know why they call them ankle biter bees, but the bee essentially will recognize the mites on its sisters and will go and chew them off, and actually, grab it with its little mandibles and just rip that thing right off. So people are trying to breed better bees right now that can withstand these invasive pests. But for right now, it's a major problem. The mechanism I use is an organic acid. And you can see here on the legs of the mite, you see little like clear pads.
Yeah.
Almost.
I didn't know if that was like stuff it secreted or.
I believe those are the kind of sticky pads. That's how it sticks to things.
Okay.
Like almost like a frog suction cup.
Okay.
Feet. You actually can use an acid that the bees are resistant to burn off the legs of the mite, and then they all fall off and die. And that seems to work for right now. The problem is every treatment you use becomes, right, evolution creates the most adaptable wins. So there are mites that are now probably resistant to the treatments, and it's an arms race against the mites. What is the way out of this? I have no idea. It's a huge problem.
Wow.
There's not a, I mean, there are honeybee keepers who say, well, I don't worry about mites, and they usually don't have any bees at the end of the year.
Wow.
So that is a major threat. In the last bit we did, we also talked about habitat loss, and I showed a picture of like a nasty thicket, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's habitat loss is a major threat to bees too. They need plenty of forage, and we talked a little bit about how to support bees. That's all still true, but unless you're a beekeeper, there's not much you can do about mites other than support your local beekeeper. You could send your local beekeeper money; they're not going to complain. But you know, in terms of what you can do at home to help out bees, having lots of forage, you know, having lots of cone flowers like this is going to be a great thing. So just keeping those bees supported in every way you can is going to help them survive. Because if the bees are struggling for food at the same time they're fighting mites, it's not going to go well, right? If you're sick and then you lose your job, you're going to be in trouble in the human world, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically the same idea. If resources are scarce and you're also sick, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the beehive. But okay, let me stop and see if you have any questions about what I've been talking about.
So do we know why there was such a increase in mites over that time?
So I think my working theory is that it was a lot of ignorance, and it was really them taking hold. Mites, like these mites, like Varroa destructors, like most invasive species, when they get a foothold, they take advantage of it and reproduce very quickly. We saw that with spotted lanternfly.
I was going to say, right. Is it like spotted lanternflies, or, you know, that those other creatures that we've had over the,
stink bugs.
Yeah, stink bugs. Yeah.
Stink bugs are a big one.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden 1 year they explode in population.
Yeah.
And you're like, where did these even come from, right? Last year I saw one or two. Now there's so many.
Right.
When an invasive species enters an ecosystem, it has the ability to reproduce very quickly because there's no predators.
Right.
These bees had no idea what they're doing. So I believe that Varroa was introduced in Florida in like the 90s, but you know, it takes a little while to take hold. And then these diseases also sort of got globalized, and so that Lake Sinai virus comes from Israel. How did it get over here? I don't even know. It could have been right now off the coast of LA. There's a bunch of container ships that are waiting to get into port to drop off stuff, you know, that people buy. Those container ships can sometimes have a beehive on them that's just moved in by accident. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
I was talking with a bee inspector once, or I was at a session that this bee inspector was doing, and she was talking about all the containers that come in that have bees that they have to go destroy because you can't bring bees into the country. Yeah. But it just happens that a beehive will move in. So you have diseases taking hold. That deformed wing virus was new, and it just sort of evolved on its own into a major problem. So we have our hands full. I remember talking with a beekeeper, really great guy, Walt. He lives down in southern Chester County. He was telling me that when he first started beekeeping, you really felt bad for yourself and felt like you were a failure if you had 5 to 10% losses over every year of bees. So that means you lost 1 in 10 hives. He would say, I'm a complete failure of a beekeeper.
Yeah.
Now you can expect to lose half. And so imagine any other. Yes, you can expect to lose definitely a quarter to a third. I mean, even the best beekeepers are losing a third of hives, but losing a half is not unheard of. Wow. And so imagine another type of livestock. Imagine every year you lose half of your cows, half of your cattle.
People would think that if that was the case, farmers, like cattle raisers, would think you were killing them. I mean, yeah. Like the government would come out and inspect your herd.
Yes. And
you would get arrested or what? I mean, things would happen.
Yeah. Or you raised chickens and you lost half your chickens every year. I mean, or you had an orchard and you lost half your trees every year.
Right.
It
That
just
would be unheard of. Yeah.
it would bankrupt you, and that's
Absolutely.
why beekeeping is doesn't really make you any money. It is
I
a
was going to say that it would be hard. It would be hard to make honey then. It would be hard to
yes,
sell honey.
it is, and it's very difficult. We have some mitigation you can take, but what it does is it makes the learning curve on beekeeping extremely steep. So
Huh.
if you were getting involved in the 1980s, sort of the golden age of beekeeping in America,
Huh.
I've heard, you could get a hive, and then next year you have two hives. Then the next year you still only have two hives, but you could build up very quickly. Now you have to learn all of this disease mitigation at the same time you're trying to learn how to keep bees, which is already complex as it is, right? It's already hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
lots to learn. So
Yeah.
it becomes you also have to learn about the threats at the same time you're learning about all the cool stuff, the stuff that you want to learn about. And so, yeah, I've been beekeeping 6 or 7 years now, something
Hmm.
like that. And, I'm only just starting to get over the curve when it comes to disease mitigation. I've lost a lot of bees, through just problems with, I know that I have neighbors that are keeping bees. They don't talk about it. They might have a hive or two in their backyard. And if they're not treating their bees can come infect mine with diseases. And they,
Oh, right.
so,
Because it's not like right, because bees aren't like chickens. Because your
right.
chickens are your chickens. I mean,
Mhm.
even if they're free range, they don't free range that far.
Except for pennies, where they show up at the police station. Right. And the Akron police rescuing Penny's chickens. Other than that, yeah, it's right. Bees actually, there's a fair amount of bees that migrate between hives. You might have 5% of bees leave your hive in a year to just go hang out with other bees. Just like humans do, right? If you live in Ephrata, you might move to Lancaster, right?
Right.
You've migrated, and a certain amount of people will leave Ephrata every year and go someplace else. That's the same
Right.
thing with bees. They actually will bribe their way into another hive. They'll show up with nectar or pollen and then give the guards at the front gate a taste of it and say, "Hey, look, I brought this in. Look, I'm a great worker. You should let me inside." And they will. The problem is if they have a varroa mite riding on them, now they've infected the other hive.
Okay, that is the coolest thing in the
That,
world that they would totally do that.
yes, yeah, and
I
it's
mean, not
it's
cool if they've got like, mites and stuff, but that's so cool. They'd be like, hey, dudes,
right. I'm a
let me
great
in.
worker.
I'm awesome.
Yeah, I'm really good at this. You should let me in. Maybe they were lazy. They didn't feel like going back to their old hive, and they found one in between the flower and their old hive, and they
Yeah,
just
yeah.
one. Um, Sometimes you'll see them drifting from hive. I mean, if I set up another hive, I'll find them drifting between them. Like people have done it where they get out a pen. There's pens you can get, paint pens. You can mark the bees, and
Huh.
you can watch them go from hive to hive. I mean, you can, if you marked everybody from one hive blue and you went into the other hives, a week later, you'd start to find blue bees showing up. So it's a natural process for these bees to want to go from one place to another. And that can be a disease vector. That's just, as we've learned with COVID, people
Right.
going down to party at the beach or whatever, they
Right.
say you're bringing the disease from here to there, and states are blocking off access to other states. So it's the varroa are a perfect parasite in that they're invisible. They can be transferred very easily from one place to another. So you think of each beehive as a town. It works the same way as any other parasitic disease or just general parasite. So that's a little talk on one of the greatest threats to honeybees. There are others that I could go into, but that's the one I've studied the most closely, just because if you ask most honeybee keepers, they're going to tell you it's these varroa, these dang mites. Got to deal with them, and it's been, there's a couple epidemiologists out there working on this type of stuff. One of them is her name is Megan Milbrath. She's an awesome researcher.
Wow.
She was like a major inspiration for me to investigate this more, because she was able to talk about it like an epidemiologist would, right?
Yeah.
She'll
Yeah.
talk about it in terms of disease transmission rather than varroa biology. That's only one part of it.
Yeah.
Understanding them. You also have to understand bee disease transmission. So yeah, that's, the other thing I would say that you could help out with bees in your yard is stop using insecticides. They call them pesticides, but pests are in the eye of the beholder, and a pesticide can also be an insecticide for things you would want around, like bumblebees and
Right.
other bee species. So just be very careful with the chemicals you're using, and you're going to do a lot, and you're going to do a lot by doing nothing, like we talked about last time. You can make major benefits, or create major benefits for your insect friends by not being so proactive. So
Yeah.
just calm it down with the Roundup and the BT or whatever you're spraying all over your yard. If you calm down with that, you're gonna be already ahead of the game and helping out these little critters who do need help.
I have to say, Will, every time we chat, I guarantee everybody is learning something, and everybody is saying "wow" a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good.
I think that, I mean, I had no idea there were all of these mites all over the place who were causing such a havoc. And I think that people will also have significant more appreciation for why honey is more expensive.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Sure.
I mean, I think that's one of those things that, hits people first, is that you're like, how come honey's expensive?
Right.
Oh, now you know.
I know.
Now you know the root of why the background of all of this stuff and why that is, and that you should probably pay more than what the price is because of all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I definitely appreciate that. What would you, before, I know you got an 11 o'clock. What would you like to talk about at our next meeting? Because maybe we can take suggestions from the audience too. I could do a Q&A or something. I've done that format before. Like, we could take questions and then build them up, and then, maybe you could give them to me ahead of time and I could pull some images or something.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Okay,
let's
cool.
do some Q&A.
Yeah. And then later we'll do the tour of the hive in the library.
Yeah, can't wait for that, because that's going in soon.
It is going in soon. Yep.
Wait.
Well, thanks
everybody. This was really great. Thanks, Will.
Yeah.